Welcome back. I'm here today with former Senator Bob Bennett. Welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
So a piece of trivia not many people know is that you're the grandson of Heber J. Grant.
That's correct.
Who was the president of the LDS Church.
That's correct. And he was one of Utah's premier entrepreneurs, as was my other grandfather, John F. Bennett. I come from good entrepreneurial stock.
So growing up, I guess you had that entrepreneurial blood within you. Starting new companies and leading companies?
By the time I came along, the companies were mature, and I went to work at them. I had my first job when I was 14 at the Bennett Glass and Paint Company that was founded by my grandfather, John F. Bennett. My father was running it at the time, and then he stepped out of that position to run for the United States Senate.
So politics, what year was that he entered into the political arena?
He won the Senate seat in 1950. And moved on into that world, the political world. I followed him in 1992 in the campaign. But I've spent most of my life oscillating back and forth between the business world and the political world. I've held a number of positions in both.
Now, right before you went into 92 into the political world, you were running a company called the Franklin Day Planner.
It's called Franklin Institute, as it was originally founded. Then it became known as Franklin Quest. And after I left, stepped down as the CEO and went to the Senate, it merged with the Covey Leadership Institute and became known as Franklin Covey.
How did that come about, you taking the role into the Franklin Institute?
Well, it was started originally as two companies. One, H.W. Smith and Associates, by my friend Hiram Smith, and the other known as Franklin Institute, Hiram and a group of other investors. And one company did seminars on time management, and the Franklin Institute printed day planners. And Hiram called me. I was living in California at the time. Hiram called me and said, "We've got this little company going, and we'd like some of your advice and help as to how to do it. Would you come to Salt Lake and spend the day with us talking about it?" The company that I had been president of had just itself been acquired in California, so I had a little spare time. I was still running it as a division of the larger parent company, but they gave me a little time, and I said, "I'd like to go to Salt Lake and just look at this thing." At the end of the day, when I had given them a series of recommendations as to how they should run the company, Hiram said, "Well, why don't you just come on board as the CEO and run it yourself?" Now, they had only 4 full-time employees at the time. It was headquartered in Hiram's basement in Centerville, Utah. And he said to me, "Bob, I know this sounds very, very outrageous, but we think we can do $1 million a year." Well, I thought, I can run this company on my lunch hour. This is not a big deal, and I can do it kind of long distance, flying up from California every now and then. We did $1.5 million that first year, and then we did 3.5, and then we did 7, and then we did 15, and it kept doubling in size. I quit my job in California along the way, moved to Salt Lake, and built it up. We eventually went on the New York Stock Exchange with a market cap of $300 million plus.
What a great ride that was.
It was indeed.
So in 92, what gave you the inspiration to jump into the political arena and run for Senate?
Well, I had stepped down as the CEO of Franklin because, frankly, I was a little bit burned out. That's very hard work. Entrepreneurs need to understand that this is a more than a full-time job. This is a complete immersion. And as I say, we had gone from that little organization to a company that was poised to go public. And I could see that it was launched now. And I just kind of had the feeling I wanted to do something else. So I stepped down as the CEO and did not know what I was going to do. Thought, well, I'll start a consulting practice and see what comes in over the door. And the first thing that came in was Hiram himself, same fellow, saying he wanted to run for the Senate and would I manage his campaign. Well, I had managed several campaigns for my father. He served in the Senate for 4 terms. And I thought, I know how to do that. But before we do this, Hiram, I said, let's find out if it's doable. Let's find out if it's possible for you to win the nomination, because conventional wisdom said that Joe Cannon had it all wrapped up. He said, well, can you figure that out? And I said, yeah, I can. And I analyzed this. And it's very much like an entrepreneurial startup. You have to analyze the market. You have to see where your funding is going to come from. You have to determine your message, figure out what your brand is going to be, how you're going to attack the market. And the one difference is a 49% market share isn't good enough. You have to have a 51% market share in order to be successful. Anyway, I analyzed it. I said to Hiram, you can be the next senator from the state of Utah. If you want to be, you can be. Yes, Joe Cannon can be beaten, and I think I know how to do it. And he said, let's go. Let's do it. I thought, my first client. And then he came to me and said, I've thought it over and I've decided I don't want to do it for a whole series of reasons. And I was very disappointed because my juices were flowing again, that I was going to do this. And Hiram and some others said, well, why don't you just do it yourself? Instead of running somebody else's campaign, why don't you just get into it? My first reaction was, no, I'm smarter than that. I don't put my name on the ballot. I just run the campaign for somebody else. But the idea took hold, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, why not? Then I had an interesting experience which your viewers might find of some value. I sat down with my father. He was still alive at the time and still very lucid. And he had had a very successful business career, not only running the business that he inherited from his father, but running businesses that he had started. And then he'd had a successful political career. Starting from scratch, the Senate was the first position he had ever run for. And so I sat down with him and said, I'm thinking about running for the Senate. And he ran me through a catechism of very probing questions. And they were questions about me, and about my motives, about my capacities. They were not questions about public issues at all. And at the end, he said, I don't see that you have anything to lose. Why don't you try it? Now, those are pretty good things to say to an entrepreneur. I don't think that you have anything to lose. And why don't you try it?
It speaks to the fact that you weren't afraid to take that risk.
Yeah. And
so in fast forwarding this through, you spent all these years in Washington.
18 years.
18 years, up to 2010 or,
yes.
or so. And you were known as a fiscally conservative Republican.
Yes.
And you served on various committees over the years.
Yes.
So 2010 you stepped out, and then went back into the
yeah. It was a period of transition. It wasn't as clean cut and as carefully analyzed as I might have liked it. I had a number of people come at me with a number of offers, and I wasn't quite sure which ones I wanted to take, and I sorted through them and ended up with a heavy foot in Washington, where there were a lot of people who wanted my skills there, and one foot, not quite so much weight on it, in Utah. And the interesting thing that has happened in the years since then is that I still have 1 foot in Washington and 1 foot in Utah, but the center of gravity has moved more away from Washington, so that the heavier foot now is coming in Utah. And the interesting thing about that, while most of the original people who came to me for advice and my contacts and whatever help I could give them were on the political side, now most of the most of the consulting work I do is on the business side. And interestingly, the political side has frozen up. The Congress is doing nothing. The logjam.
What do you think the logjam is happening? A lot of people sit back and say, well, why can't they do this? Or what would you say the fundamental premises of lack of being able to move things forward?
There are a lot of reasons for that, and we could spend your whole program talking through. The electorate has become more polarized than it was during my time there. My time there, when you worked with a Democrat to solve a problem, you got credit for being a problem solver. Now, if you work with a Democrat to solve a problem, you're attacked as a traitor to your values. Well, one of my driving values is solve problems. That's why I went to government. I remember when I first got there, there was a fellow who was speaking to the Republican senators at a retreat, and he said, the duty of the opposition party is to oppose. And here I am, a brand new freshman senator. I raised my hand and I said, that's not why I came to Washington. And he says, well, you're a Republican. I said, sure, I'm a Republican. But I came to Washington to legislate. I'm a legislator. And if I can't legislate solutions to our nation's problems strictly within the Republican Party, I'm going to reach out and see if I can't find some Democrat and convince him to come over with me for a free market solution to this problem. And I was able to do that many times. That became, as I say, an act of betrayal to some people in the Republican Party. And so they said, well, you move along. Right now, the parties, they do not want to break away from their ideological moorings, even to have a conversation, let alone to make a deal. Now, that will change. The needs of the country are so overwhelming, it has to change. But right now, we've got this polarization, and it's digging in rather than working itself out. And so I'm saying, if I were there now, I would not be able to do the whole reason I went there for in the first place. And there are more opportunities to change society and the direction of America outside in the private sector than there are in government. So I am delighted to have been placed in the private sector. It wasn't voluntary, and I was mad for a while. But as I look back on it, I say, the delegates did me a huge favor, and I'm grateful to them.
What message would you give to the youth of today?
Be optimistic. Be optimistic. One of the things that bothered me the most about the campaign that I had, my final campaign in 2010, was the number of people that came up to me with a sense of complete despair. And they talked about what I've just described, the polarization and the lack of progress. And I remember one sweet woman in Utah County and came up to me. She was literally trembling. She said, I am so afraid for our country. These are the worst times we have ever had in our entire history. And I said, would you have liked to live during the Civil War? And she said, well, no. We were killing each other. Ultimately, the Civil War, we killed more Americans in the Civil War than all the other wars we've fought put together. Killing each other. Now, that was a worse time.
I'll have to say so.
And she said, well, but that's the worst in our lifetimes. And I said, no. I remember Vietnam. I remember the bitterness and the division, and they were shooting students on campus over the divisions in Vietnam. That was a worse period of time. We have come out of these. The basic spirit of America is still there. And if you're sitting there saying, oh, there's no opportunity left because Congress is dysfunctional, the government is shut down. Look, governments don't lead. They never have. Governments react. The leading comes from the economy and it comes from private citizens, and then governments react to what is necessary to allow that kind of progress to go forward. Theodore Roosevelt didn't invent the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution came along, changed America, and then Theodore Roosevelt kind of reinvented government to react to some of the excesses that came out of that circumstance. And our post-war, Ronald Reagan reacted to the realities of the Cold War, and then the realities of globalization came along, and we haven't yet reacted properly to all of those, but we will. So, if you're a young entrepreneur, if you're a young person who has big dreams for the future, there's no better place in the world for you to be than America. And there's no better place that can incubate your dreams and turn them into something that is growing and powerful and that can make you successful than the American economy. It's the deepest, most resilient, most well-integrated economy in the world, and you have an opportunity here as powerful as any opportunity that anybody ever had. Seize it and go forward and make your dreams come true.
That's great. We've been visiting here with Bob Bennett. He's a former U.S. Senator, but also a great entrepreneur over life who has served in various roles throughout his career. Bob, thank you for being on today's show.
My pleasure. It's good to be with you.
We'll be right back after these messages.